Hello all, today's topic is modern period. The modern period in English literature begins with the 20th century. It was a time of technological advances, the Great Depression, and above all, two devastating world wars. The First World War was fought between 1914 and 1918, primarily in Europe. During this time, many economic and political changes occurred around the world. Britain had a tough time recovering from the war. The Great Depression was the worldwide economic slump which began in the United States following the Wall Street crash of October 1929. When the crisis hit, Britain was badly affected, and in late 1931 began a slow recovery from the crisis. It weakened Britain's position as a global power. In 1936, Edward VIII became King of Britain following the death of his father George V, but rules for less than a year. He abdicated the throne in order to marry Valley Simpson, an American divorcee. Thereafter, he took the title Duke of Windsor. Edward's brother, Prince Albert, ascended the throne as King George VI. George VI was king through the Second World War. Neville Chamberlain was Prime Minister of Great Britain at the start of World War II. Hitler's invasion of Poland in September 1939 drove Great Britain and France to declare war on Germany, marking the beginning of World War II. After the British forces failed to prevent the German occupation of Norway in April 1940, Chamberlain lost the support of many members of his Conservative Party. In May 1940, Neville Chamberlain resigned and King George VI asked Winston Churchill to become Prime Minister. Churchill, who was known for his military leadership quality, was appointed as the British Prime Minister. He remained in the position until 1945. Charles Darwin, Karl Marx, and Sigmund Freud were some of the thinkers who influenced the modern period and modern literature. In the second half of the 19th century, Darwin had questioned the idea of Genesis, leading to the dilemma of faith and doubt. Marx's theories showed man as an economic being. Freud's psychoanalysis theory influenced the age a lot. The term modern is applied specifically to the literature written since the beginning of World War I in 1940. This period has been marked by persistent and multidimensional experiments in subject matter, form and style, and has produced major achievements in all the literary genres. Some of the most notable writers of this period include the poets W.B. Yeats, T.S.Eliot, W.H. Jordan, Wilfred Owen, Robert Graves, Dylan Thomas, etc. The novelists James Joyce, D.H. Lawrence, Dorothy Richardson, Virginia Woolf, E.M. Forster, Aldous Huxley, Graham Greene, etc. And the dramatists G.B.Shaw, Sean O'Casey, novel covered, etc. The modern period was also an important era for literary criticism. Among the innovative English critics were T.S.Eliot, I.A. Richards, F.R. Lewis, etc. Writers responded to war, financial collapse, and social change by experimenting with the traditional forms and conventions. Poets abandoned traditional rhyme schemes and wrote in free verse. The inner workings of consciousness were a common subject for modernists. This preoccupation led to a form of narration called stream of consciousness. Poetry often includes foreign languages, dense vocabulary, and invented words. Symbolism was not a new concept in literature, but the modernist particular use of symbols was an innovation. They left much more to the reader's imagination than earlier writers, leading to open-ended narratives with multiple interpretations. Literary historians locate the beginning of the modernist revolt as far back as the 1890s, but most agree that what is called high modernism, marked by an unexampled range and rapidity of change, came after the First World War. The word Georgian frequently occurs in discussions of modern poetry. They represent the last gasp of the great Romantic and Victorian traditions. They were shortly swept away by the truly modern poets like Ezra Pound, T.S.Eliot, etc. Ezra Pound's "Make It New" is a tag word of modernism, by which he meant change the rules for writing and for reading. He launched the Imagist movement in 1912. Leading up to the First World War, Imagist poetry was dominating the scene. Imagism sought to present an experience itself rather than reflections drawn from experience. T.S.Eliot was an American-born British poet who is often considered as one of the most influential poets of the 20th century. His first well-known work was The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. His another poem, The Wasteland, is a major work of modernist literature. Written about the aftermath of the First World War, this poem describes the disorganization and collapse of society. His other works include Hollow Men, Four Quartets, etc. Four Quartets consist of 4 poems published individually from 1936 to 1942 and in book form in 1943. In 1948, Eliot received the Nobel Prize in Literature for his outstanding pioneer contribution to present-day poetry. Irish writer W.B. Yeats was another significant figure in modern poetry. He was a symbolist from the beginning to the end of his career. His greatest collection of poems is The Tower, which contained famous poems like Leda and the Swan, Among School Children, and Sailing to Byzantium. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1923. W.H. Auden was another prominent poet during the modernist period. His poems deal with themes such as love, politics, culture, psychology, religion, etc. His works include Funeral Blues, September 1, 1939, etc. He won the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry for his poem The Age of Anxiety. Two great British war poets, Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon, both served as army officers during World War I. The two became great companions. Sassoon served as a mentor to the younger Owen, encouraging him and suggesting revisions to some of his poems. Sassoon wrote anti-war poems such as Virus and Counterattack. Owen's famous poems include Poems and Strange Meeting. Most of his poems were published after his death. Robert Graves was friends with Siegfried Sassoon and Wilfred Owen. His feelings about the First World War were complex and ambiguous, and his writings reflect this. Graves continued writing poetry into the 1970s, and many of his best war poems were written long after it was all over. His poems include Fairies and Fusiliers, Country Sentiment, Recalling War, etc. He is frequently remembered for his memoir of First World War, Goodbye to All That. Dylan Thomas was a Welsh poet who wrote in English. During World War II, Thomas wrote radio scripts for the Ministry of Information and documentaries for the British government. He published his first volume of poetry, 18 poems, in 1934. His next poetry collection, 25 poems, was published in 1936. In the early years of World War II, Thomas published 2 works, The Map of Love and Portrait of the Artist as a Young Dog. The modern novel is predominantly psychological. The new stream of consciousness technique revolutionized the form of the novel. The psychological novelist, instead of telling the story in a chronological sequence, probes deep into the working of the subconscious mind and moves backward and forward freely. Dorothy Richardson, James Joyce, and Virginia Woolf practiced this method successfully. Dorothy Richardson is regarded as one of the most important of modernist novelists. She is best known for Pilgrimage, a sequence of 30 novels that follows the life of a character called Miriam Henderson between the ages of about 17 and 40. Dorothy Richardson was a pioneer of stream of consciousness technique. James Joyce was an Irish author. His Ulysses is a key text of literary modernism and is the finest example of stream of consciousness technique. The book's 18 chapters are loosely based on Homer's epic poem Odyssey. Virginia Woolf is best known for her novel Mrs. Dalloway. She was an important writer in the modernist movement. She revolutionized the novel with the stream of consciousness technique. Her other works include Jacob's Room, To the Lighthouse, A Room of One's Own, The Waves, etc. D.H. Lawrence was a prolific writer. His novels Sons and Lovers, The Rainbow, and Women in Love made him one of the famous writers of the 20th century. Lawrence's last novel is Lady Chatterley's Lover. It was a controversial work. and was ostensibly censored for being indecent and immoral. G.K. Chesterton was one of the prominent authors of the 20th century. His works include Orthodoxy, The Everlasting Man, The Man Who Was Thursday, The Father Brown Mystery Stories, etc. E.M. Forster was one of the great English novelists. He published 5 novels during his lifetime, the first 4 of those between 1905 and 1910. His famous novel, A Passage to India, deals with Indian society and culture at a time when it was under British rule. Ernest Hemingway was an American writer. He was renowned for novels like A Farewell to Arms, The Old Man and the Sea, etc. He won the Pulitzer Prize and the Nobel Prize in Literature for the novel The Old Man and the Sea. Graham Greene is another writer of the 20th century. His first novel is The Man Within. His best-known works include The Power and the Glory, The Heart of the Matter, The End of the Affair, etc. George Orwell is best known for his allegorical political novel Animal Farm. It is written in the modernist period. His other works include Burmese Days, The Road to Wigan-Pier, 1984, etc. Aldous Huxley wrote both novels and non-fiction works. He projects the disillusionment and frustration with contemporary social life. Chrome Yellow was his first novel. It was followed by Point Counterpoint. The Brave New World satirizes a scientific utopia where everything is controlled by science. The new dramatists began to portray the actual English life in their plays. The characters in their plays were often restless, questioning, and dissatisfied. G.B.Shaw's dramas come under the category of problem plays, argumentative plays, or plays of ideas. In his plays, he depicts society in its true color and discusses all the problems prevalent in society with the help of speeches and discussions. Shaw's plays, St. John, The Apple Cart, Too True to Be Good, etc. belong to this period. Shaw was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1925 and an Oscar in 1938 for the screenplay of the film adaptation of Pygmalion. Verse drama was revived by T.S.Eliot, whose Murder in the Cathedral was a great success. Sean O'Casey was an Irish dramatist. His 2 important plays are Juno and the Peacock and The Plough and the Stars. His other plays are The Silver Tassie, written in 1928, Within the Gates, Purple Dust, etc. Noel Coward made his name as a playwright with the Vortex. Other plays are Fallen Angels, Hay Fever, Design for Living, Blight Spirit, etc. The critical movement called New Criticism began in the 1930s and 1940s in Great Britain and in the United States. This approach ignores the author, his or her biography, and historical context, focusing on the literary work, which they uphold as autonomous. In England, its leading representatives are I.A. Richards, T.S.Eliot, F.R. Lewis, and William Emerson. I.A. Richards was an English educator, literary critic, and rhetorician. His work, Practical Criticism, a study of literary judgment, contributed to the foundations of the New Criticism. T.S.Eliot's essay, Tradition and Individual Talent, was published in 1919, first in The Egoist, a literary magazine, then in his book, The Sacred Wood, Essays on Poetry and Criticism. The essay contains Eliot's famous formulation of the impersonal nature of poetic creation. F.R. Lewis's first book of criticism was New Bearings in English Poetry. His other major critical works are Revaluation, The Great Tradition, The Common Pursuit, etc. William Emerson was another literary critic of the 20th century. His book, 7 Types of Ambiguity, presents 7 different ways in which a variety of poets utilize ambiguity in their work. Postmodernism replaced modernism after the Second World War and dominated the latter half of the 20th century. That's all for today. Thank you for watching.